Alright, so this is Ember's Why I Quit Playing Elden Ring video. Now this came out a while ago, and it's nowhere near as long as previous videos I've reacted to this month, so hopefully it won't be 40 minutes long again. But yeah, let's look into why he quit playing Elden Ring.
When Elden Ring first came out in February, I thought I would never stop playing. With how much replay value games like Bloodborne and Sekiro gave me, I could only imagine how long I would be playing Elden Ring with its vast open world and hidden secrets.
Yeah, I feel the same as well. Like, I felt the same. But Elden Ring was interesting for me, and I'll kind of go into this as he goes into his reasonings, where I also stopped playing Elden Ring. I did stop playing Elden Ring. I beat the game 3 times, and then I sort of just put it to rest. I didn't really pick it up much until, like, recently, where, like, this year, I've already beaten it, like, a few more times. So, last year, I didn't play it as much as I thought I would.
But, to my surprise, it wasn't long. To be fair, in my first playthrough of the game, I clocked in probably double the hours of any other game.
116 hours. John Dark Soul, level 170. That just tells you how much content there is in this game. And it makes me all the more laugh. Like, let's say for the sake of argument, he died a shit ton of times. Let's take off, like, 10 hours worth. From, like, so 106 hours instead, where he's actually making progress. Those reviews of the game, where they didn't even play the game at all, but they felt that, like, they could give the game a fair review, doesn't it make their points all the more flimsy? When the game is this long and they didn't even play it?
Games in the series, but playing through it again just felt a little bit different. Something had changed. After some careful consideration, I came up with 3 reasons why I already quit playing Elden Ring. Number 1, the open world. Well, I think
the open world was a very good idea, and on paper, it had the potential to be, like, infinitely replayable. And in my opinion, Elden Ring is the most replayable Dark Souls game. However, a lot of the magic is lost on a second playthrough, because at the end of the day, there's, like, so many different dungeons. They give you different loots, whether it's spells, you know, equipment, armor, ash summons, ashes of war, so many different shit. And at the end of the day, if you're going a certain build, you're not going to have any incentive to explore every single dungeon. You're going to be like, right, I want to do a magic build. This is what I want to do. Okay, I don't need this, that, the other. I need to go here, 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 here. That's it. And you end up only going to, like, you know, 20% of the map, you know? So you're not going to 100% everything at every playthrough, because there's just no point.
FromSoft's attempt at creating an open world was incredibly successul. It
absolutely.
Came at a price. It sacrificed the replay value that other Souls games have due to its layout within the open world.
Did it really, though? I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong. I literally just said that, you know, your first playthrough might be like 100 hours, whereas every subsequent playthrough might be like 10 or 15 hours. But I don't think it sacrificed replay value. I mean, the fact that I've played it so many times, and I play it differently every time, I think that justifies that it does have replay value. Just not as much as, like, your first run through the game. And at the very least, every run in Elden Ring will be different, whereas games like Dark Souls 3 especially, it's just the same experience over and over again.
To be fair, this is how most single-player games are. You play through the game once, and you end it right there. And that's totally fine. With the amount of content Elden Ring brings to the table, one playthrough is more than enough to get your money's worth. Which is why I don't have any real gripes with the game in comparison to other AAA titles. The problem lies within my expectations of a From Software experience.
Okay.
With the way the world is structured, once you've been to an area once, it's hard to feel the need to do anything there again unless you need a specific item there.
That is a very good point. Like, there is hardly any occasion in Elden Ring where I feel the need to replay, oh, not just Elden Ring, but other games, where I feel the need to revisit a certain area, unless I'm grinding, like, rats for rune arcs. Like, I'll 100% Limgrave, and I just never go there again. So that is a very good point. However, that was the same with previous games as well. To an extent.
Once you know what
I think it's just something that is to be expected in a Souls game. Like, It's not like Dead Space where you explore multiple parts of the ship and, you know, in a later chapter you revisit the same part, except that you have, like, you're able to unlock a door that was previously locked, you know? It's not like that. It's a case of you need to explore these areas to get from A to B, from B to C, and then C to the boss fight, you know?
An area such as Caelid has to offer, are you really going to go through it again and willingly fight every single enemy?
I mean, no, you're not, but at the same time, you're going to willfully go to Caelid every time, because Caelid has good stuff, you know, it has the gold scarab, it has the dragon, which can give you, like, a free 75,000 runes, it has one half of the Dector's medallion, it has Radagon's Sword Seal, it has, you know, the festival, it has the dragon communion, it has, you know, the death root for the beast clergyman. It has so much stuff in Caelid, so even though you might not 100% Caelid every single time, you still go there and you still do shit.
Enemies drop an incredibly low amount of runes, and the only real incentive for fighting them is, well, there isn't any. There's little reward for fighting enemies.
That is kind of a recurring problem that Elden Ring has. It's just the enemies, for the most part, just don't give you that much runes. Like, in comparison, I know that, like, there's the Mogwin Palace grinding spot where every enemy gives you, like, 2,500 runes. But, like, that's pretty much the best you're getting in Elden Ring. Like, the enemies don't give you much.
Instead of just running past everything to the next side of grace, which puts a huge dent on the replay value in this game, considering that that's the core element that made these games successful.
Especially since, as well, I agree with his point, and I apologize for keep pausing it, but, like, one thing that Elden Ring does is that the enemies don't really drop you that good gear. Like, most of the time, they'll just drop crafting materials. Whereas in previous games, you could grind them and you could get, like, their weapon or your armor. And that does happen in Elden Ring. But against these weak enemies in dungeons, not so much.
Bosses are the only real way to get a substantial amount of runes to level up, but we'll get to that later.
Jeez, 400,000 runes from Loretta. That's crazy.
Freedom that the open world gives you was supposed to allow for smoother playthroughs once you know where you're going, but what it really does is cut out tons of content for you on your future runs.
That is true, however, the game is a much smoother... Like, he's right, and he's right with his positive and negative thing. Like, yes, Elden Ring is a much smoother experience on subsequent playthroughs, because you know exactly what to do. You know what you can do. Like, you're like, right, gotta get the horse, gotta get, you know, this, that, the other, and I know where I'm going, okay? So in that sense, it's smoother, but yes, this does come at the cost of not exploring everywhere.
I honestly think having a more linear experience is stronger for these types of games, even though the open world has a nice change of pace.
I think a linear experience is good to an extent, however, where I draw the line is Dark Souls 3. I know I seem like I'm bashing Dark Souls 3, but it really is true. Like, in Dark Souls 3, there's, like, maybe 4 or 5 examples in the entire game where you can branch off and do other stuff. That's it. Whereas in, like, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, you know, there's so many different pathways you can go. And I think that whilst there is linearity in those games, it still manages to succeed in being open, you know? Like, Dark Souls 1, literally as soon as you arrive in Lordran, there's like 4 different directions you can go. You know, Dark Souls 2, there's like 8 different possible bosses that can be your first boss in Dark Souls 2, which is insane. Bloodborne, you know, you've got the Cleric Beast, you've got Father Gascoigne, you've got, you know, Central Yharnam, which is a massive area, and then, of course, you have Elden Ring. So I think that linearity is okay, but it needs to be open as well, because otherwise it'll feel repetitive.
Number 2, the exploration. One of the biggest selling points for Elden Ring was the fact that...
I feel like exploration and open world kind of go hand in hand. Unless he's gonna explain something differently.
You could go anywhere and explore to uncover hidden secrets within the world. The problem with this in terms of replayability is that most of the things you uncover within the world are dungeons with reskinned enemies and bosses or unnecessary items that you'll never use.
It's unfortunately the truth.
Realizing this in my first playthrough really put a damper on my excitement for exploration. It was fun finding new areas or dungeons, but once I knew how to get to the main areas I needed, exploring the world felt kind of pointless.
Exactly. That's literally what I said. You know, when you're doing a specific build and you know where to go, it just makes exploration pointless because all it's going to give you is like, if it's a dungeon or something, it'll give you like a adequate amount of runes at best, and it'll give you a piece of equipment you have no intention of using. So yes, it does put a damper on exploration, I agree.
Incentive in the beginning was bosses. I love bosses in these games, and I was determined to beat every single one of them. Using a melee build, I knew most of the rewards I'd be getting would be useless for me, but it was still fun seeing what items I might discover. But
Definitely.
After about 100 hours of doing this, it became clear that the biggest reward I was likely to get from exploration was either a reskin boss or a mediocre spell that I would never use.
Jeez, look at this. This boss, I can tell it's all... Like, look at the enemies in this arena. That is Elden Ring boss design in a nutshell. Like, this guy is not that hard by himself, so they throw in 3 standard enemies. Also, just an idea, I feel like what they could have done is make it so that you can find, like, weapons and gear and shit, but I think that what they could have done is every single time you beat a boss, you get, like, a certain currency, and then at the round table hold, you can trade in the currency for, like, a piece of gear. Whether it's a spell, a piece of armor, or even, like, a free level up. I think that would have made exploration that much more impactful. Because think about it, you could choose, like, a specific spell, or, like, a random spell, or something like that. Or, if you already have the gear, you could get, like, a free level up. I think that would have made exploration better.
And to be fair, it's absurd for me to even whine about this considering the amount of content that there is in this game without
That weapon looks really cool. Let me go back. These knives, the blood blades, they look so cool.
Whine about this considering the amount of content that there is in this game without including these dungeons and puzzles, but the other games never felt like this. Also, it's obvious that exploration isn't going to be as exciting in your second playthrough regardless of how great the items or bosses are, since you already know what's coming.
Yeah, and I think the exploration in Dark Souls 1 and Bloodborne was perfect, because even though you didn't have to, like, every area you pretty much have to visit. There's only, like, a couple of areas where they're completely optional, you know? So, like, you can go to you have to go to most areas, but you can go there in any order, which I think is better. And then you can decide for yourself whether you want to speedrun them or not, which I think is better.
Speaking of bosses, number 3, the boss fights. This is...
Yeah. I feel like most of his issues towards the bosses are going to be towards, one, the optional ones, as well as how reskinned they are and how reused they are. But also, I think bosses like Malenia and Malekith, just those that border on being way too fucking fast.
Without a doubt, the biggest reason I quit playing Elden Ring. I appreciate that they tried to approach them in a different way to appeal to newer players while also throwing veterans off, but I just don't think they executed this properly.
Agreed. And I also think that, like, you gotta execute the bosses in a Souls game. Because for most people, the boss fights are the highlight of the game. So then when you have Elden Ring, like, reusing shit in dungeons, it leaves a sour taste in people's mouth. Especially when you realize that even though there's like 100 bosses in Elden Ring, only 30 of them are like main bosses, you know, like legends, demigods, etc., right? But even those 30 are reused. There's only like 9 original bosses in Elden Ring. And you know what? Chances are those 9 are everyone's favourite bosses. You have like Malenia, Malekith, Placidusax, Radagon the Elden Beast, Renala. You know, the best bosses are, funnily enough, the ones that aren't reused.
First of all, some of the movesets were so insane that the fights just didn't even feel fair.
Like, holy shit, look at that. I'm well aware that counters for a Waterfell dance exist now, but imagine you're a new player and you see this move for the first time.
Some of the movesets were so insane that the fights just didn't even...
Look at that. Like, she just turns into a fucking Beyblade. Just all of his health goes, and she also gets healed every time she hits you.
And feel fair. With bosses like Malekith or Malenia, it didn't even feel like I ever had a chance to fight back. And
yeah, I 100% agree. I think with Malenia, her difficulty is a bit overrated, but you guys know me, I fucking hate Malekith. I think he is so fast, and it's not even funny. Coupled that with his blood flame attacks, it really makes the fight feel bullshit.
This game very much wants you to be aggressive, so it just didn't make much sense to me. There are bosses where I felt like I either had to fight them until I got lucky with RNG, or I had to use my spirit ashes. They give you...
I agree. But, like, again, Malekith is such a good example. There were times where Malekith was just relentless, just attacking over and over again with his, you know, AoEs, shit like that. But then there'd be other times where, like, his AI would get stuck for, like, a split second. I'd end up breaking his posture, getting a riposte, and finishing the fight. It's so weird. Like, I feel like it's so inconsistent. It pisses me off, you know? But again, I think that there are different ways of approaching boss fights. Like, you can make ones that are slow, telegraphed, but they have a shit ton of health and hit hard. Or you can make bosses that are really fast, agile, and have ranged attacks, but they're not that powerful. But Elden Ring tries having its cake and eating it, where they introduce, like, really fast bosses that also hit incredibly hard, and it's just... it's alienating for some fans.
You absolutely no time to heal or even attack for more than one hit at a time. I went back to Dark Souls 3 the other day and was shocked at how many hits I could get in at once. Instead of making the bosses do modest...
Playing Dark Souls 3 after Elden Ring was so weird. I got hit by, like, every boss because I was expecting them to delay their attacks far more than they actually did. Like, in Elden Ring, every boss delays their attacks by a ridiculous amount. And I went back to Dark Souls 3 expecting it to be the same, and I got hit by attacks that I've not got hit by in years, just because I expected them to delay the attacks, but they weren't, you know? But even so, even though the bosses were faster in Dark Souls 3, like they didn't delay their attacks as much, it felt more fair.
Damage with larger health bars like Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring made bosses have smaller health bars but can easily one-shot you if you're not careful. This is actually a huge problem I had with the game Neo. I loved the game itself, but no matter how far I got in the game, I was always either 1 or 2 hits away from dying at all times. That just kind of feels like artificial difficulty to me. But I think if Elden Ring had adjusted this a tiny bit, it would have made them much more enjoyable rather than dodging a 15-move combo.
I think that's part of the reason why Elden Ring is so difficult. In terms of its difficulty is so inconsistent. It's because they designed the game with the Ash of War summon system in mind. So, if you fight a boss with a summon, it doesn't matter which summon it is. Like, here he's using the Mimic tier, but it can be any summon, you know? The split aggro is so powerful, and it makes fighting bosses easier. However, if you go into the fight without a summon, you realize very quickly just how fucking difficult that is. Because the game wasn't made with that system in mind. It was designed with you going in with a summon or an Ash summon or whatever. Which is why some bosses like Malekith and Melania are borderline impossible for most people on their first, on like a blind playthrough, you know? And for some people who are thinking, oh, he's ranting about Malekith, I think that Godfrey, Radagon, and Placidusax are some of the best fights in the game, even though they're some of the most powerful bosses.
Just to get one hit in every time. Aside from this, I have to discuss the reskins. Personally, I would rather have more bosses as long as it doesn't hurt the quality of the main story ones, but some of the reskins really devalued the main bosses. Having Estelle appear twice kind of ruined the experience of finding him the first time, and this happened with tons of bosses.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't care about reskins if they're all optional. But the fact that they reuse the story bosses, like Margit and Godfrey, I mean, they kind of changed the fight with Morgott and, you know, Hoarah. But you have, like, Mohg, for example. Mohg appears in an Evergale for no No, he appears in a dungeon, sorry. For no reason. He's just reskinned. You have Godfrey in an Evergale. You have Estelle, as he mentioned. You have, like, just different bosses that are reused. Like, Mimic tier appears as regular enemies, fierce champions. You know, Magma Worm, Flying Dragon Agheel. You know, so many bosses are reused in Elden Ring that are, like, the main ones. And I think, honestly, it would have... And that's kind of the thing, you know, only 9 or so bosses are actually completely original. So...
in the game.
He makes a good point.
Margit again in the open world. I also didn't like how
That is a fair point as well. I completely forgot about that. You can find Margit again in the open world and just fight him. Why?
Margit and Morgott fights were so similar, even though they were both incredible. It felt the same with Godfrey having his two forms. It just took away from the experience and made the fights not as desirable to come back.
And don't even get me started on the tree sentinels. These motherfuckers are everywhere. And especially this in particular example, Loretta. You fight her in Ranni's Rise, and you fight her in the Halleck Tree.
To in another playthrough. Most of them felt way too easy or way too unfair, and it's not really a get good thing for me. It's more of an issue of how enjoyable they are. Obviously,
as well as the fact that a lot of the dungeon bosses are far too fucking easy with the right build. Like, look at this guy. He took down like 3/4 of his health and got a posture break in no time whatsoever. Let me just go back to that. Full health.
Good thing for me. It's more of an issue of how enjoyable they are. Obviously, you can fight Malekith a million times until you know.
Less than 10 seconds. I mean, in fairness, ask a virgin on prom night how long they lasted. It was probably less than 10 seconds. But 10 seconds for a boss fight in a Souls game? Come on.
His moveset perfectly, but the fight itself isn't even fun enough for me to want to do that. Someone like Gale, for example, could have a similar style of aggression, but I would still enjoy trying again because it's a fun fight. Bosses are my #1 reason because they are my favorite part of these games, and when they feel a bit lackluster, it really makes it hard for me to—
Like, when you look at Malenia's arena, this shit is beyond beautiful. It's such a shame. Like, Malenia could have easily been, like, the best boss in all of Souls. Like, she could have easily overtaken Gale as, like, the best boss in the Soul series. But she just has so many different issues. Just like the different bosses, unfortunately. And I don't think any boss in Elden Ring is, like, the best boss in any Souls game. To be honest, I don't think that. Just because, like, not even Placidusax, who I think is, like, the best boss in the game. Because at the end of... maybe Placidusax would be, like, in my top 5 favorite Souls bosses. I don't know if he'd be #1, though. Just because, like, again, he can be so easy with the Ash of War summons, you know? The way they designed the game, it's just so difficult to compare Elden Ring bosses to the other Souls bosses.
To find a reason to continue playing. I'm hoping the DLC will fix some of these issues and bring us some of the best bosses we've seen so far, but honestly, my hopes aren't as high. I'd also love to see a PvP arena because that's another thing that made the game a bit stale for me. Duels are always pretty fun, but invasions just aren't even worth it anymore. I understand the changes they—
Yeah, and to be fair, I'm the wrong person to comment on PvP because it's just not my thing. But they could have done more with PvP in the game.
Made for newer players to avoid them just getting invaded out of nowhere and getting stomped on, but that's, you know, part of the experience. Having a requirement—
I'll be honest, the only time I actually invade in Elden Ring is if I want to visit Mogwyn's palace early. And you have to do that guy's quest where you have to invade people 3 times. You don't even have to win. You just have to successfully invade people 3 times, and then you can go to Mog's palace early, where the best farming spot in the game is located. Bruh.
Environment of 2 people before anyone can invade you makes sense, but it lacks the intensity it used to have. Now, if I invade, it's basically just an instant gank of Rivers of Blood spam. I think PvP is probably what has the most potential to give these games replay value, and they still haven't quite managed to get it right. I still love Elden Ring, but I don't see myself playing it through again anytime soon.
Honestly, that's fair enough. You know, that is fair enough, and I know that it sounds like I've been shitting a lot on Elden Ring in this video, which I haven't. It's just that when you really love something, it can be easy to be blind to the issues that the game has. Elden Ring does have a fuck ton of issues, however, I still played the game regardless, because I think it's phenomenal, and the sheer amount of content in this game is mad. I just wish that the reused content was separate to the main game. Like, the amount of reused I don't give a shit that they reused the optional stuff. I don't. Like, dungeons, Evergales, they can reuse that shit all they want. However, reusing, like, the main 20 or 30 bosses does take away from the experience. Like, don't get me wrong, I love fighting Flying Dragon Agil, And I'll always enjoy fighting a big fucking dragon on a horse. You know, it's just cool. But when you have to do it like 10 times, and there's very little difference between all of them, like, oh wow, this dragon, you know, is an endgame version of the one you already fought. Whoa. Oh, this one has a magic attack. Oh, this one can make you have Scarlet Rot. It's like, it does take away from the experience. And the Tree Sentinels are another example. Like, I think the first Tree Sentinel is the best one. And then, like, the others are just not that fun. Like, oh, wow, you have this one that fires magic. Oh, you have the Draconic one that uses lightning. Whoa, whoop-de-doo, you know? So, yeah, I think that Elden Ring... I mean, I haven't stopped playing Elden Ring, as you know. And I don't think I will stop playing it. Like, I'll probably be playing it in, like, 10 years' time. But the game does have quite a few issues, and I hope that the DLC has fully original content. Like, say for example, the DLC, if it gives us 5 main bosses and like 10 optional bosses in like dungeons or stuff like that, I think that would be really cool. But we'll have to wait and see.